Jadamalang was a quiet village, tucked between two hills near the muddy flow of Kali Jid, the kind of place where time felt slower. People farmed, raised chickens, lived simple lives. But if you asked anyone who'd ever stayed there long enough, they'd tell you one thing: the villagers didn't talk much. They minded their own business. Never asked too many questions. Never got involved in what wasn't theirs. Arguments, they ended behind closed kitchen doors. Never at the mosque. Never at community meetings. Everyone kept their distance. That year, the rainy season came early. Downpours every day, mud everywhere, clogged drains. But something felt off. The smell of wet earth was different in Jadamalang. Not fresh, not clean. It had this bitter, metallic scent, like the rain wasn't soaking the soil, it was soaking something buried beneath it. It all started with Mrs. Regine. She was stubborn. A seasoned farmer said she had a bad cold, but within 2 days, her skin blistered. No cuts, no injuries, just bubbling flesh along her arms, beneath the blisters. Her skin turned black. The clinic doctor called it an infection, but the meds didn't work. None of them did. On the 4th night, Mrs. Regine woke up screaming. She dreamed of a bald-headed boy sitting in the corner of her room. The child didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared with eyes so black they looked like holes. The next night, same dream, but this time, the boy got closer. He stood by the bed, smiling, watching. The morning after, Mrs. Regine started talking to someone invisible. When her husband asked, she replied calmly, "I'm just answering the boy." Her husband panicked. He nailed garlic above every doorframe, stuck keller leaves on the windows, scattered salt in the corners, but nothing worked. 2 weeks later, Busari, who lived across the street, fell ill. Her chest felt tight. She vomited blood, not red, but black and thick like tar. Her husband, packed dull, whispered to neighbors, "This is no sickness. This is Mrs. Regine's doing. Maybe she's the one sending this curse." The whole village turned tense. Doors were locked even during the day. People nailed dry bamboo over their porches, hung flowers, refused eye contact, and all of them started asking the same silent question: who's sending this? And who's next? Only one house remained untouched. No garlic, no salt, no bamboo fence. It stood at the edge of the village, beneath a giant trembesi tree no one dared to cut down. It was Emma Yati's house. No one really knew her age. Some said she was older than electricity in Jadamalang. She never left her home, rarely spoke, but she had helped birth every child in the village. Not one of those children got sick, even as neighbors around them collapsed. She just sat on her front porch, weaving dried bamboo, never looked left, never looked at Mrs. Regine's house. But at exactly a.m. that night, someone saw it. A small boy standing in front of Emma Yati's house. His head was bald. His eyes were pure black. He didn't blink. He didn't move. And somehow, he had no reflection. No reflection, no shadow. The bald boy stood silently under the rain in front of Emma Yati's house. His eyes were wide open, his smile unmoving. Several villagers claimed they saw him that night, but when asked to describe his clothes, none of them could. He wasn't wearing anything. One whispered he was covered in something like ash, said another, but the strange part wasn't what he wore, it was what he left behind. The next morning, muddy footprints appeared across the village, tiny, bare, leading from Emma Yati's house to the door of Mrs. Regine, and just before the door they vanished. Mrs. Regine wasn't screaming anymore. She sat on her bed, perfectly still. Her hands were gripping something tightly, a clump of red thread wrapped around 3 toothpicks. Her husband tried to take it away, but her body collapsed the moment he did. Not dead, but hollow, like a puppet with no strings. The local midwife, Bu Menik, came to check on her, but refused to enter the house. She said the floor felt alive, like it pulls. That night, Bu Menik locked her doors, but woke up gasping. A single red thread was sticking out of her belly button. She tried to pull it. It resisted. She screamed. Neighbors rushed in, but all they saw was her mouth open wide, something writhing behind her teeth. By the third day, more villagers fell ill, but this sickness came with dreams. The same bald boy, the same eyes, the same voice, except now the boy spoke. He said, "Your names are almost gone. Once they fade, you'll be mine." Some tried to leave Jatamalang, but once they crossed the bridge, they began bleeding from their ears, and in their blood were symbols like Javanese letters, broken and reversed. One by one, they returned, but changed. They didn't respond to their names. They didn't speak. They just sat outside at dusk, mouths shut, eyes fixed on the trembesi tree. That's when the whispers began, not from people, but from under the ground, soft, familiar, calling names, Rajin, Menik, Sari, and the more names it whispered, the more people forgot who they were. It started with forgetting names, then birthdays, then the names of their own children, one by one. The villagers became strangers in their own homes. They smiled at photos on their walls, but couldn't tell who was in them. They called each other, you, or just pointed. Even Mbayati stopped responding to her own name, but it didn't stop at memory. Within days, a new pattern emerged. People who had forgotten everything began developing an unusual mark, a faint red circle around one of their eyes. At first, it looked like irritation, but soon it darkened. It pulsed, and then it blinked. It wasn't a rash. It was an eye, a third eye, not metaphorical, not symbolic, an actual, functional eye growing on their faces. It moved on its own, watched even while they slept, and it didn't blink at the same time as the others. Some villagers tried to cut it out. They failed. One man packed dull stabbed his face with a sharpened bamboo stick. His body thrashed, but the eye didn't bleed. Instead, it let out a wet, muffled scream. Not his voice. Something else, something deeper. From that night on, he never opened his real eyes again. Only the third one stayed open, always watching. Hazen was the only one untouched. He still remembered who he was, still said his name clearly, still saw the eyes growing on his neighbors and felt the fear, not the pull. He lived at the edge of the village and rarely spoke to others. Perhaps that's what saved him. But Hazen noticed something disturbing. Everyone who had grown a third eye was somehow connected. They moved in sync, turned their heads at the same time, sat facing the same direction every dusk, as if being pulled by invisible strings. And then there were the threads, red threads, thin, barely visible under sunlight, glowing faintly at night. Hazen saw them trailing from house to house, from walls to necks, from ceilings to wrists, tangled in under the trembesi tree. One night, he followed a thread. It led him through the rice fields. Behind Busari's abandoned home, it disappeared into the ground. He dug and found a bundle of bones, tightly wrapped in red thread. Some of the bones were tiny. Like a child, the thread twitched in his hand, alive. He dropped it and stepped back, and then he heard it, a voice from the soil. Your name is still yours, but not for long. Hazen froze. The voice didn't come from above. It didn't echo. It vibrated deep inside the ground beneath his feet, as if the soil itself was whispering directly into his bones. The red thread in his hand twitched again. This time, it coiled, alive, angry. He dropped it and stumbled backward, but when he turned around, the rice fields were gone. All around him was darkness, no stars, no trees, just threads, thousands of them, hanging in the air like spiderwebs stretching endlessly across nothing. Some threads were taut, some were loose, some carried pieces of things, fingers, hair, jawbones, and names written on thin paper tied to each strand. Hazen's name wasn't there, but he saw names he recognized, men and women he grew up with, neighbors, friends, even Mrs. Rajin. Each name was faded, almost erased, and behind every fading name was a glowing red eye watching. Hazen ran. He woke up on the floor of his home, drenched in sweat and dirt, but something had changed. He felt sore, like something had been pulled out of him. He rushed to the mirror. Nothing. No eye, no mark, no thread. But when he lifted his shirt, he saw it a small red circle near his ribs, barely visible under the skin. It pulsed once, then again. He wasn't cursed. He wasn't being haunted. He was being marked. That night, Hazen returned to the burial site behind Busari's house. This time, he came with fire. He poured kerosene onto the bones. He lit a match. The fire roared, but the thread didn't burn. It squirmed, twisted, then melted into smoke. And that smoke entered Hazen's lungs. He dropped to his knees, coughing, choking, and inside his head, he heard the voice again. You can't burn what's already in your blood. When he looked up, the bones were gone. The soil was smooth, clean, as if nothing had ever been buried there. But from that night on, he started seeing them tiny red strings drifting in the air and connecting to his fingers. Hazen tried to shake them off. The red threads were light, thinner than hair, but he could feel their pull. They tugged gently at his fingertips, swaying like they were caught in an invisible current. When he moved, they followed. When he stopped, they pointed, not forward, not upward, but into the ground. Every night, the threads multiplied, from his fingers, from his chest, even from behind his ears. He no longer needed light to see them. They glowed faintly in the dark, whispering directions he didn't understand, like veins from something ancient, growing outward. By the fifth night, they began leading him. He couldn't resist. His legs moved without will. The threads dragged his steps to places he never dared go, beneath old granaries, into abandoned sheds, behind the walls of houses long left empty, and everywhere he followed, he found things, not relics, not artifacts, people. They weren't dead, but they weren't living either. Their eyes were glassy, third eyes wide open, mouths stitched by red threads, bodies sitting motionless in corners, facing the same direction, each of them with one thread connected to the center of their forehead, trailing back toward the trembesi tree. Hazen finally realized the tree wasn't cursed. It was the anchor. Every thread led there, and deep beneath its roots, something was still alive. He returned to his house with trembling hands. He lit a candle, opened his notebook, and began drawing what he saw. Diagrams, connections, how every house had one thread leading underground. He noticed patterns. Families whose names were almost forgotten had more threads around them. Those who still remembered their names had less. But one thing stood out. His own name, Hazen, was starting to fade when he wrote it. The ink trembled. The lines broke, as if the letters were resisting being remembered. In panic, he spoke his name aloud over and over. Hazen, Hazen, Hazen. But after the 15th time, the sound felt unfamiliar. By the 20th, he forgot why he was saying it, and when he stopped, the threads around him tightened, not like strings, like muscles. He collapsed, and as his eyes fluttered, he saw something above him, a silhouette, small, motionless. The bald-headed boy stood upside down on the ceiling. Red threads ran from his fingers, connecting to every corner of the room, and from his lips came one sentence, soft, final. Now, you are the knot. Hazen couldn't move. His body felt sewn in place. The red threads had woven across his arms, chest, and face, tight, warm, and pulsing like blood vessels. He could still breathe, but every breath came with a whisper, not from his lungs, but from the thread itself. Now, you are the knot. He looked up. The bald boy was no longer on the ceiling. He was now standing in front of him, eyes black and endless, body blurred like smoke wrapped in flesh. But it wasn't a child's voice anymore. It was deeper, older. It had always been older. The boy placed a hand on Hazen's forehead, and instantly, memories flooded in. not just his own, but the village's generations of them. He saw Embayati when she was young, kneeling in front of the same trembesi tree, whispering names into a bowl of ash and red thread. He saw every birth in Jatamalang being marked with a ritual no one remembered, every illness, every sudden death, every strange disappearance, all of it anchored to one thing, a promise made long ago, a pact of protection. The village was never cursed by outsiders. It was protected by something inside, and that protection came with a cost. Each time the pact weakened, someone had to be sacrificed, turned into a new knot to keep the network strong, a living node to hold the web together. This time, it was Hazen. He screamed, but no sound came out. Instead, red thread poured from his mouth slow, endless, like silk unraveling. His skin hardened, his eyes dulled, his thoughts quieted from outside. It was just another quiet night. One more person gone silent in Jatamalang. The villagers continued their days. They didn't talk about the red threads. They never mentioned the bald boy, and they no longer remembered the name Hazen. Because that's how the protection worked. It erased what it consumed, and deep beneath the trembesi tree, the network pulls once more, balanced, complete, until the next name begins to fade.